Thank you so much, Craig, for that introduction. And really disappointed I couldn't be here with you in person. I would have much preferred to have those moments of networking. So I hope you'll invite me back next year so we can have a chance to do that. I was really excited to be there last year as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be there at North American Carbon World. And very happy to have the opportunity to update you on CARB's work over the past year, which has been incredibly busy. And then I also want to share with you what's coming up next as we're thinking about ways that we can tackle this crisis. Last year, California passed new climate legislation, updated its climate strategy, and worked on major climate and clean air policies, all focused on definitively ending our dependence on fossil fuels and transitioning to a clean energy economy. Governor Newsom and our legislature have made it absolutely clear that California is all in on the fight against climate change. Last summer, the legislature codified in law our goal to make the state carbon neutral by 2045 or sooner, with man-made greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced by 85% by 2045. That law was part of a package of new legislation championed by Governor Newsom that sets California on course to achieve those climate ambitions, including by establishing a clear regulatory framework for carbon capture, removal, utilization, and storage, setting clean energy targets of 90% by 2035 and 95% by 2040 on the way to 100% clean energy by 2045, and developing carbon removal targets for California's lands, along with methodologies for tracking the progress towards those targets. The governor and legislature have demonstrated their commitment to climate action through absolutely historic investments in zero-emission vehicles and equipment and charging infrastructure, offshore wind, energy storage, sustainable battery production, building decarbonization, sustainable land management practices, and clean energy workforce training, to name just a few examples. As Craig stated so eloquently, the climate crisis is the defining challenge of our time, and we are committed from the governor's office to the legislature's chamber and across our state agencies to meeting that challenge. And we really welcome your partnership, ideas, and innovations as we work together. One of CARB's key roles in this work is to develop and update the scoping plan, California's climate action plan for reaching our state greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. In December, the board approved the fourth iteration of the scoping plan, and it's the most ambitious to date. That scoping plan charts a course for California to reach carbon neutrality by 2045 and shows that in order to reach this target, we'll need to accelerate near-term emission reductions by increasing our 2030 target from 40% to 48% below 1990 emission levels. Consistent with the consensus of climate scientists globally, the analysis in that scoping plan makes clear that getting to carbon neutrality will require both eliminating emissions everywhere possible and sequestering and storing carbon. We will need to cut fossil fuel combustion across our society, from transportation to energy production to industrial processes. This is essential, and that is the central part of our climate strategy. But because we anticipate that we will still produce greenhouse gas emissions in 2045 from sources like hard to decarbonize industrial processes and from combustion vehicles still on the road, we know we will need to capture and store carbon in forests and soils using carbon capture and through direct air capture. Fully implementing this scoping plan will be transformative. In addition to slashing greenhouse gas emissions, it will cut smog-forming air pollution by over 70% by 2045, finally allowing California to achieve national air quality standards and saving billions of dollars in pollution-related health costs, and creating millions of new jobs as California's economy continues to grow. These goals are going to require deep decarbonization across all sectors of our economy and our society. By 2045, we need to reduce both liquid petroleum consumption and fossil gas use in buildings to less than a tenth of what we are using today. So we will increase the number of zero-emission vehicles on our roads. We need to double electricity generation, quadruple wind and solar capacity, and massively ramp up our hydrogen supply. We also need to increase public transit, walking and biking options, sustainably manage our agriculture and wild lands, and pursue many other strategies in order to get to carbon neutrality. I want to say a word about the adoption of the scoping plan. We had an incredibly robust process, and our board members were extremely engaged. We held hours of discussion at board meetings at CARB. We heard hours of testimony from community members who are passionate about tackling climate change and improving the lives of communities that have been so hard hit by pollution and are the communities most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. In addition to those hours of discussion at board meetings, we held a roadshow of sorts where we went out and we heard community concerns, and several board members joined me for those meetings across the state. And the plan that the board voted on reflected our continued support for the importance of carbon pricing as a key piece of our overall strategy, continued aggressive action in energy and transportation, and interest in pursuing new opportunities such as carbon capture and strategies for sequestering carbon. We ended up with a unanimous vote in support of the plan and a lot of excitement around rolling up our sleeves and starting implementation. So now that the plan is complete, we're embarking on that implementation. The plan demonstrates that we can achieve our ambitious climate targets by building on that portfolio of policy, by building on our strong enforceable regulations that send clear market signals to manufacturers and drive technology development, continued development of incentive programs that support technology development and deployment and help ensure that clean technologies are accessible to Californians, and those important carbon pricing programs that ensure we're harnessing the innovation and investments of the private sector to steadily reduce emissions. We regularly update our suite of climate programs to make sure they align with the targets set by the governors and legislature and are built on a foundation of the latest and best available data and informed by a robust public process. So we're going to continue to assess and review our programs to ensure that they reflect the ambition of our climate goals as reflected in the scoping plan and the urgent need for climate action. California's cap and trade program and low carbon fuel standard have each been in operation for over a decade and have been central to our success in reducing greenhouse gas emissions to date. As you know, the cap and trade program sets a declining cap on 80% of our emissions and creates a strong incentive for reducing emissions across our economy with a steady escalating price signal. Importantly, the cap and trade program's steadily declining emissions cap ensures that no matter how other programs in our portfolio perform, California will meet its GHG reduction goals. And the program generates billions in revenue that is invested in projects that reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions and that protect public health and the environment, with a particular focus on benefits to those communities disproportionately impacted. Like cap and trade, our low carbon fuel standard, or LCFS, sets a price on carbon and so incentivizes decarbonization within the transportation sector. LCFS provides an incentive to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels and helps drive innovation and clean fuel development across the transportation sector. These alternative fuels not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also clean the air by reducing pollutants like toxic diesel emissions. And the revenue from the credits traded in the program supports clean air and climate initiatives, such as the installation of charging infrastructure. Both cap and trade and LCFS were designed for a 2030 greenhouse gas reduction target of 40% below 1990 levels. But in the development of the scoping plan and the analysis that we did to support that work, we understand that an increase in stringency is needed to achieve a 48% reduction goal by 2030 in our scoping plan. Just to achieve the original 2030 target, we knew we would have to more than double our efforts compared to what was needed to achieve the 2020 target. So now we must ensure that all of our climate programs aligned with that increased ambition for 2030 on that path to carbon neutrality by 2045. We have already begun the public process to gather input on potential updates to both cap and trade and LCFS. CARB staff plan to put out a rulemaking schedule for cap and trade over the summer. Key topics for evaluation will include evaluation of caps in the context of that increased ambition in the 2022 scoping plan, reevaluation of the potential implications of 5% overall banked allowances, studies of electricity and industrial sector leakage, updates to offset protocols based on the latest science, mechanisms to protect low-income households from the impacts of energy prices, and inclusion of carbon dioxide sequestration and removal projects. CARB will be working closely with our partners in Quebec to collaborate on any potential updates that will pertain to our linked carbon market. As we embark on this process, we're considering all options. We will carefully assess those options to ensure that increased program stringency will achieve emissions benefits while keeping programs cost-effective and minimizing leakage. And we are so fortunate to have such talented staff with deep expertise to do this work, led by our executive officer, Steve Cliff, who returned to CARB 6 months ago from the federal government to assume his current role. Some of you worked with him at the inception of Cap and Trade, and you'll be hearing from him in just a few moments. We've heard from many of you who have shared your insights to help shape the development of our programs and inform updates over the last several years. I encourage you all to continue to engage with us as we review and update our climate portfolio to realize our vision for a carbon neutral California. As we tackle this work, we are keeping at top of mind that the impacts of climate change fall disproportionately on frontline communities, and it's a priority for CARB and for California to ensure that our climate policies address those pollution burdens even as they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we will continue to engage and partner with communities as we implement the plan and review those programs. A recent study highlights how climate policy can address environmental justice. Research from Arizona State University indicates that California's cap and trade program has not only reduced levels of air pollution in overburdened communities, but is helping to close that gap in the pollution burden between these communities and others. Although we have a great deal of work still to do to address the historic and ongoing impacts of environmental justice, these findings indicate that climate policy can both address greenhouse gas emissions and help clean the air and protect communities. As we enter this age of implementation, it will be more important than ever for all of us to work together to ensure that we can quickly and equitably build a clean energy economy. CARB works closely with our sister agencies to coordinate work at the state level. We partner with the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission to ensure that the build out of charging and fueling infrastructure is keeping pace with the growing ZEV fleet. That's just one example of how we are working closely together. But we also need commitment and action by local jurisdictions to ensure that clean energy projects and infrastructure are permitted and built efficiently. The federal government's investments in electric vehicles and charging, heat pumps, and other clean technologies through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will provide important support for California's efforts. And international partnerships, such as our longstanding partnership with Quebec, continue to be central to California's climate work. Alongside all this intergovernmental collaboration, public-private partnerships can accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy by driving innovation, growing markets, and broadening investments. California's 2022 scoping plan is unprecedented. No other jurisdiction, much less the soon to be fourth largest economy in the world, is pursuing such aggressive, comprehensive action on climate. Reaching that goal of carbon neutrality in less than a quarter of a century will require all of us to be part of the solution. And I look forward to partnering in this critical work and continuing to build a carbon neutral future together. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope to see you all in person next year.